Hello, welcome to Elizabeth Reads. We are reading A Place Called Perfect by Helena Duggan. We are right now on chapter 15. We're about halfway through. Jars of Color. Violet followed silently behind Boy. They covered the distance to the Archer's Emporium quickly. He signaled for her to stay back as he approached the door, but she ignored his orders and was by his side when Boy discovered it was locked. "What will we do?" she whispered, making him jump. "I told you to stay back. It's my dad we're looking for." "Do you have a hair clip?" he asked, ignoring her tone. She pulled a pin from her ponytail. Boy fiddled with the lock, and after a few minutes there was a faint click. He turned the handle and the door opened. "Have you been to jail?" she whispered, amazed. "What? No, of course not." "It's just I thought people only learned that stuff in jail." "Or in no man's land," he winked. The shop was empty and they slipped in, closing the door behind them. It was dark, but the glass cabinets still gleamed in the night. The thick carpet softened the sound of their steps. "There's no one about," Boy breathed after a quick investigation. "Bungalow isn't here, Violet." "Then where is he?" she whispered. "We saw him go in. How could he get out without us seeing?" Then a thought struck her. "I want to check something. I have an idea, then I promise we'll leave." Quickly, Violet walked across the shop to the mahogany wall on the opposite side and ran her fingers along the wood until they met a familiar bump. As she pushed gently, the wall gave way to the library beyond. She smiled back at Boy and entered. It was darker than in the shop as there were no windows in the library, but a thin strip of light warmed the carpet from under the door on the far side of the room. A shadow passed through the light. Violet inched across the space and placed her ear against the cherry wood. A familiar sound greeted her, a sucking noise. She pulled Boy alongside to listen. After a few minutes it stopped and the light went out. They found a hiding spot behind an old leather armchair to the right of the door and waited for someone to come out. "Any idea what that noise was?" Violet whispered. Boy shook his head. "It's the same one I heard tonight in my house, from the machine Bungalow carries on his back. We have to go in there and find out what it is." "Not yet, Violet. Let's wait a minute," Boy protested. "You don't know what you're saying. I've already told you to be afraid of the Watchers. They're seriously dangerous." "Please, Boy," she begged. "You don't understand because you have no parents. My dad is one of my two favorite people in the world. I can't let anything happen to him. I need to find out what's going on." Suddenly, Boy's face changed. He was angry. Violet bit her lip. Maybe she shouldn't have said that. Maybe he wished he did have parents, even though he said he didn't want any. Her dad always told her to think before she spoke, in case she hurt someone's feelings. Maybe she just hurt Boy's. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it," she whispered. "I'd hate to not have parents." Boy looked down at his feet away from Violet. They fell into an awkward silence. "I'm not afraid of the Watchers, you know," he said after a while. "I can handle whatever they do to me." Unconsciously, he cupped the bruise on his arm. "I know. It's just, we have to be careful, Violet. You have to promise you'll listen to me. I mean it this time." "I will, I swear," she said, nodding her head earnestly. They waited in the darkness a bit longer, and when nobody emerged from the room, Boy crept back to where they'd stood and listened. Violet followed. There was no sound behind the door. He turned the handle, leaned his weight against it, and pushed gently. It opened just enough for the pair to slip through. Then Boy shut it quickly behind them. Violet stood just inside the entrance. The room was long and narrow. 3 rows of shelving about 2 meters high ran the length of both walls. These shelves were made of steel, a contrast to the rich wood that covered the rest of the emporium, and they were filled with glass jars, loads of them. Each jar held a strange colored gas that glowed in the dark, filling the room with a ghostly light. "What are they?" Violet whispered, picking up one of the jars. The gas was dull, a dark blue-green color, and it moved sluggishly behind the glass. Boy picked up a second jar with slightly brighter colors, dark blue-greens mixed with hints of yellow and a single stream of bright red. "Look," Boy whispered, pointing to a worn sticker on top of his jar. It read, "Mr. John Bumsbury, completed 9th December 05, last top-up 9th December 2016. Violet looked up at her friend. "I haven't a clue what it means," he shrugged. He moved her jar toward Boy's for a little more light, then noticed it also had a label on the lid. "Mrs. Charlotte Cotts, completed 24th March 06, last top-up 24th March 17. Violet gasped. I know that name, she whispered. Charlotte Cots lives in Perfect. She's in Mam's book club. Come on, Boy said, putting down his jar. He walked towards the far end of the room, not stopping until he reached a separate section of shelving where the jars were different. These were only partially full. The gas inside was brightly colored, almost luminous, and moved about rapidly behind the glass. The mixtures of colors were beautiful. Boy picked one up and read the label. Mr. Jim Joyner's Incomplete, last session 14th June 06 NML. I know him, Boy said, his voice shaky. He lives in no man's land. Quickly, he put down the jar and picked up another. Mr. Raymond Splinters, Incomplete, last session 1st August 06 NML. I know him too. Violet was reaching for another jar when a noise startled them both. Footsteps were approaching from the library. The pair scrambled for cover. The bottom shelf by her feet didn't have as many jars, so Violet ducked down and crawled into the space, pressing her back to the wall. She nearly knocked one of the jars over and just managed to steady it as the door opened and the lights flickered on. She held her breath and balanced precariously on a shaking arm. The footsteps advanced down the room towards her hiding place. A pair of large, polished, brown leather shoes stopped millimeters from where she kneeled. Ah, Violet Brown, George Archer suddenly said. I hope you've been a good girl. Her heart stopped. She waited, terrified, but George Archer seemed to be distracted by something on a shelf above. That blasted watcher, he spat. Still not enough. Do I have to do everything myself? There was a clatter of glass, and then George turned on his heel and marched down to the opposite end of the room from where he'd entered. The lights switched off, a door slammed, and the place was plunged back into darkness. He was looking at that jar, Boy said, jumping out from his hiding place. He ran to the spot where the tall twin had stood moments before. Violet crawled out shakily and stood by his side as Boy reached for the jar. It was about a quarter full of brightly colored glass, which raced around inside at lightning speed. He passed it silently to Violet. She stared at the shiny new label stuck to the top. Miss Violet Brown, processing. Her legs weak, she handed the jar back to Boy and felt her way to the floor. What is it? She trembled. Why does it have my name on it? I don't know, Violet, Boy whispered, crouching by her side, but I promise we will find out. That's the end of the chapter. I'll see you next time for chapter 16. Bye-bye.